To our 2024 Modern Studies webinar. We are Karyn, Rebecca, Iga and Estelle, and together we're a team of criminologists based in Scotland working together as part of the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research, the SCCJR for short. Today we will answer questions submitted by Modern Studies learners and teachers in Scotland, and at the end we have a list of resources that you might find useful for further information and for your coursework. There are also several learning resources and linked YouTube videos on topics relating to crime and justice for Modern Studies learners. You can find the link to these on the signposting slide and at the end. Thank you to the SCCJR and the Modern Studies Association for their continued support of this work, and thank you to you for listening today.
For this section, we're going to focus on community sentences, as this cropped up a few times in our calls for questions and topics. You can find many useful resources and videos in relation to sentencing from organisations such as the Scottish Sentencing Council in our signposting session later in the webinar. Community sentences are often referred to as alternatives to prison, which suggests just how much we prioritise the use of prison as the main sentencing outcome within the justice system. However, more people are given community sentences than custodial ones. For example, in 2021-2022, 14% of sentences were custodial compared to 24% which were community. Prior to sentencing, a criminal justice social worker is allocated to a case and they prepare a report for the sheriff. This report contains background information about the individual in question, the circumstances of the crime, a risk assessment, and a recommendation for sentencing. There's not always a guarantee that the sheriff will agree with these recommendations as they ultimately make the final sentencing decision. According to the Scottish Government in 2007, where an offender can remain in the community, they should be made to pay back. Crime causes damage. Wherever possible, punishment should include an element of reparation to make good on that damage and force offenders to face up to their actions. So I'll leave you to make up your own minds about the nature of the language used in this report. But there are many options within community sentencing, and the majority of outcomes come under the umbrella of the Community Payback Order or the CPO. However, people can also be instructed to pay compensation in the form of a fine or be given a tag alongside a curfew to stay at a specific address within certain hours. CPOs were created in 2011 by the Criminal Justice and Licence in Scotland Act 2010 and can last for a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 3 years. In Scotland, CPOs are supervised by criminal justice social workers employed by local councils. Criminal justice social work services have 3 key outcomes as stated by the Scottish Government. So the first is community safety and public protection, the second is to reduce reoffending, and the third is social inclusion to support desistance from offending. Within the remit of the CPO, there are 10 options and the courts can decide which to include. This gives the sheriff the flexibility to tailor the CPO to the individual and address their needs as well as their offending behaviour. These requirements include supervision, unpaid work and other activity, a conduct requirement, residence, restricted movement, which was new in 2022, mental health treatment, alcohol treatment, drug treatment, attending programmes aimed to change their offending behaviour, and finally, compensation. A supervision order requires individuals to attend regular meetings with their supervising officer to discuss offending behaviour and work together to address their needs with the aim of reducing reoffending. Depending on the level of need, the meetings can be set weekly, fortnightly or monthly, with the aim obviously the meetings becoming less frequent as the order goes on. The supervising officer is required to provide regular progress reports to the court, who can then decide if the individual can carry on with the CPO or not, depending on their progress. A supervision requirement is needed for any additional requirements to be added to a CPO, except from unpaid work for over 18s. Unpaid work can be given for a maximum of 300 hours, and there is also an option for 30% of these hours to be completed using other activity to be arranged by the supervising officer. For example, people can work in charity shops or do voluntary work, and this is really useful for individuals who are maybe not suited to traditional unpaid work, which can involve physical activities such as gardening or painting. A conduct requirement on a CPO provides a degree of flexibility for the court to tailor the sentence to the individual to target their specific aspects of their offending behaviour. For example, they could ban someone who has a history of shoplifting from entering the town centres during shop operating hours. In cases where individuals are not complying with their CPO by, for example, not attending appointments, missing unpaid work, or maybe committing further offences, the supervising officer can submit what is called a breach report to the court, displaying evidence of their non-compliance. This could then result in the case being recalled to court, where the sheriff can decide if the individual will carry on with their CPO or if they'll carry out the remainder of their order in prison. Therefore, the threat of prison always looms over individuals on CPOs. Different to the drug treatment requirement of a CPO is a drug treatment and testing order, or DTTO. So this is another non-custodial sentence and was first introduced by the Crime and Disorder Act in 1998. These intensive sentences focus on drug treatment as a way to reduce reoffending. As part of the order, people are regularly drug tested and have reviews in court to monitor their progress and address any other needs they may have, such as physical health or issues with housing. However, this outcome is not used as often as other community sentences, and reoffending rates tend to be higher due to the more complex needs of those involved. Mentioned briefly above was the tag as a community sentence, also known as a Restriction of Liberty Order, or RLO, which has been around since 2002. And they're quite interesting in that they are not managed by criminal justice social work, but by a private company called G4S. However, it is the social worker who performs the initial assessment to determine suitability. How these work is that someone is given a tag to wear, usually around their ankle, and a monitoring unit is fitted to the address they've been instructed to stay at during the length of their sentence. The tag is programmed so that it must be within a short distance of the monitoring unit during set hours, which is usually 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., but this can be tailored to an individual's circumstances. One of the main aims of the RLOs is to reduce the chances of individuals carrying out crimes by restricting their movement. However, this can also be stressful for family members if a relative has been tagged to their address and they have visits from authorities such as police, and if there are any issues with compliance. RLOs can be served concurrently alongside CPOs, and any breaches are dealt with in a similar way. So Community Justice Scotland, this is an organisation that was launched in 2017 following the National Strategy for Community Justice as a new national body to oversee community justice and introducing requirements to achieve national and local outcomes. They aim to work with various partners to help break the cycle of reoffending and allow people to make a positive contribution to society. To do this, they work to change perceptions and challenge social norms surrounding justice-involved people and help find the right balance between payback and rehabilitation that works best for society as well as the individual. They've devised several media campaigns and initiatives, such as Second Chancers, which helps to show the lived realities of justice-involved people in an attempt to encourage compassion and understanding from the general public in a society which tends to centre prison as the main form of punishment. And they've actually toured the Second Chancers exhibition all over Scotland to create awareness of the justice system and the impact that it has. And I would encourage you to have a look at their website, which displays the interesting work that they've done. In terms of effectiveness of community sentences, making direct comparisons between that and prison can be quite difficult because people in prison may have committed more serious crimes or have different life histories. However, we can look at the statistics in relation to reconviction rates. So those who were given community sentences in 2020 to 2021, the reconviction rate was 25.1%. And for prison, the reconviction rate was 27.8%, which does suggest that prison is not as effective as community sentences, but as I was saying, it's not really a straightforward comparison. Also, there is actually a decrease in reoffending by those given community sentences by 16% from the previous year, which is thought to be due to the pandemic. A Prison Reform Trust report found that community sentences are actually effective for people with a high number of previous convictions and poor mental health, but the use of these disposals is actually halved in the last 10 years. Also, the use of imprisonment is actually rising despite the amount of crime decreasing. And recent figures suggest that the average cost of a CPO is under £2,000 compared with the £37,000 it costs to keep someone in prison for a year. However, these figures are from 2017, so it is safe to assume that the cost of each has risen, but it is clear that community sentences are much cheaper than prison, whilst keeping individuals at home in their own community and mitigating against the harms that can be caused by prison.
Crime statistics. Crime statistics give us important information about crime. For example, what kinds of crime are taking place, when and where, who the victims are, who the perpetrators are, how much crime is taking place, and how often it is taking place. In Scotland and the UK in general, official crime statistics are really useful and important pieces of information, As I will shortly discuss, they have a high degree of rigour attached. However, even within this, it's important to bear in mind quite substantial limitations, as I'll mention. So there are two key pieces of information in Scotland about crime. These are the Scottish Government's Recorded Crime in Scotland publication and the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey. So the Scottish Government's Recorded Crime in Scotland publication is published annually, so figures for 2023 to 24 were published in June. This publication reports on crimes that have been reported to and recorded by the police, in this case Police Scotland. Not all crimes are reported to and therefore recorded by the police. This means that this publication does not measure all criminal activity. This is what criminologists call the dark figure of crime. However, this publication provides a really important measure of the volume of criminal activity the police respond to. As this is published annually, it's also possible to compare trends over time, both in general terms and with regards to specific types of crime. The Scottish Crime and Justice Survey is a large-scale social survey which asks people about their experiences and perceptions of crime in Scotland. The survey is based on around 5,000 face-to-face interviews conducted with adults, that's aged over 16, living in private households in Scotland. So this means that some population groups are excluded, for example, children and those living in group residencies like student halls, or those without a fixed address, for example, people who are homeless. So this is an important limitation. It is primarily a victimisation survey which captures adults' experiences of being a victim of violent crime and property crime, including those that may not be reported to the police. Therefore, it makes a useful complementary resource to police recorded crime. That said, there are still some other limitations. For example, it does not capture data on all crimes. Crimes without a direct or specific victim are not included. This includes speeding, drug possession, and homicide. And by that we mean murder and culpable homicide. While there are some important limitations to both of these sources, they are very important pieces of information, which are used by various individuals and groups, for example, by researchers, by practitioners, by public sector organisations, by voluntary sector organisations, to name a few. There are various other information sources on crime statistics in Scotland, but these are two of the main ones. Youth justice. Much of this information is taken from the SCCJR learning resource titled Youth Justice, so please do have a read of the resource and watch the video. So first of all, how many young people are involved in crime? As with crime in general, it is difficult to know the true extent of youth crime. However, the data that we have tells us that youth crime has fallen since the mid-2000s. It's important to bear in mind that most young people are law-abiding, as in they don't get involved in crime. And if they do, it tends to be for quite minor crimes on the whole. If young people do offend, they tend to grow out a bit with age. There's also a relationship between those involved in the justice system and deprivation and other challenges such as trauma and adversity. So that is important context. So what do we mean by youth justice? So in Scotland, youth justice refers to the individuals, institutions and services with which young people under the age of 18 come into contact as a result of their involvement in offending behaviour. Scotland is well regarded internationally for its approach to youth justice. This is because it is based on what is called the Kilbrandon ethos or philosophy. And this is about treating children who offend as needing support rather than punishment. It's about recognising their welfare needs. And it's linked to the fact that children whose welfare needs are not being met are often in danger of offending. The Children's Hearing System, also called the Children's Panel, is based on these principles. Children and young people enter the Children's Hearing System when they have been referred to the Children's Reporter. The vast majority of cases which involve a child under 16 are referred to the Children's Reporter rather than the Crown Office of Procurator Fiscal Service. That means that children go through the Children's Hearing System rather than, for example, courts. This approach means that Scotland's approach is quite distinctive internationally and also when compared with other UK jurisdictions, including England and Wales and Northern Ireland. However, there are some features of youth justice in Scotland that sit a bit oddly with this. This includes the minimum age of criminal responsibility, which means those that can be arrested, charged or prosecuted for a crime. Although in 2019 the Scottish Parliament raised the minimum age of criminal responsibility from 8 to 12, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child encourages states to set the minimum age at 14, but actually recommends this is higher at 15 or 16 years old. How we see children and young people changes over time and in response to new evidence. For example, new scientific research found that young people take much longer to physically and cognitively mature than previously thought, and only reach adulthood in this sense when they're around 25. In response, the Scottish Sentencing Council now recommends in its guidelines that for anyone sentencing a young person under 25 years, i.e. a young person who's been convicted of a crime and are given a punishment for this, they should consider maturity and rehabilitation.
Structural versus individual theories of crime. So the key difference between these two theories is that structural theories do not attribute the causes of crime to a particular individual, but rather to social factors, while on the contrary, individual theories focus on personal characteristics, motivations, and decision-making processes that lead someone to commit crime. So the difference here is in their focus and explanations for criminal behavior. So in terms of structural theories, which emphasize how the organization of and inequalities within the society contribute to crime, we can look at a few different examples. So the first one would be Marxist theories, which emphasizes the contribution of the capitalist system and the inequalities caused by the system to be the leading causes of crime. For example, Marxist theories of crime would look towards the societal level factors such as poverty, lack of education, and absence of opportunities as root causes of crime, caused partially by the unequal distribution of resources under the capitalist system. Another example would be feminist criminology, which explores the effects of the patriarchal structures on crime. We can also look towards some other examples of theories such as strain theory, which suggests that pressures derived from social factors such as lack of income or lack of quality drive individuals to commit crime, as well as social disorganization theory, which explains variations in crime rates across different communities based on their structural and cultural characteristics. And this theory presumes that crime is more likely to occur in areas with weak social norms and a lack of social control. In terms of individual theories, which, like I mentioned previously, emphasize or focus on personal characteristics rather than social factors, we can look towards, for example, rational choice theory, which views crime as a calculated decision based on weighing costs and benefits. We can also think about biological and psychological theories, such as different strands of positivism, which attribute crime to innate traits such as low self-control, mental illness, or genetic factors. And these theories have been quite broadly criticized within criminology due to, for example, being quite racist and sexist. We can also think of social learning theory, which suggests that criminal behavior is learned through associations with the surrounding environment, as well as social control theories, which focus on individuals' bonds to society and what causes these bonds to weaken, increasing the likelihood of crime. These different theories will impact not only on how crime is understood, but also on how the criminal justice system functions, as well as the process of sentencing. So they're quite important in terms of understanding how we sentence people for different crimes depending on these theories and which ones are prioritized. It's also important to mention that we have a learning resource on SCCJR website which details some of the key theories and causes of crime. So please have a look at that to find more about different theories of crime. So criminology is a constantly developing discipline with some new areas of research emerging constantly. So in this section, I'll briefly introduce some of the new and developing areas of criminological research that are worth exploring. However, it's important to mention that this is not an exclusive list, all of the new developments, and there's a lot of different research that's happening within criminology. So the first development is green criminology, which is a relatively new area responding primarily to concerns about the climate crisis and the damage caused to the environment that affects both people and the planet. So green criminology brings together traditional conceptualizations of crime and criminological theories, as well as some newer ways of understanding crime and harm. So aside from exploring illegal acts such as wildlife trafficking, illegal fishing, mining, logging, or illegal waste dumping, green criminology also focuses on those acts that are damaging to the environment but are not legal. So for example, deforestation of rainforests in order to build factories, or the unwillingness of governments to ban fossil fuels. So these acts, as well as omissions, are more difficult to engage with and theorize because they are not illegal, and oftentimes they do not have an easily identifiable victim and a perpetrator, and the consequences are often not immediate and can take months or years to become visible. So to understand these acts and omissions, green criminology has engaged with semiology, which is a study of social harm. Semiology allows these events to be understood not through the lens of crime, but social harms, meaning that acts such as deforestation, which pose a long-term harm to a large group of people, with consequences appearing months or years after the event took place. And in this way, it's able to account for challenges posed by traditional theories of crime. Increasingly, green criminology and semiology as well have been incorporating elements of Southern criminology, looking at the perspectives of scholars and communities of the Global South to understand the harm and damage that disproportionately affects them. This allows green criminology to understand and explore the ways in which harms done by states and corporations of the Global North affect the environment and people in the Global South. And this is particularly important in a context of green criminology, as global corporations tend to exploit the labor and environment of the Global South for their own profits. So while green criminology encompasses a lot of different perspectives, some of which include application of traditional criminological approaches to understand the damage to the environment, semiology also allows for the attention to be focused on harm, going beyond the classical definitions of crime as being linked to criminal law and justice system. Another one of the developments would be cybercrime, which is a form of transnational crime taking place in the borderless realm of cyberspace. And in terms of cybercrime, computers or computer systems are a tool, a target, or a place of criminal activity. And some examples here would include phishing, ransomware, or data breach. And the consequences are often that some personal information is being stolen, for example, passwords, bank accounts, and credit card numbers. There are constantly emerging new types of cybercrime, and that goes alongside the development of new technologies, for example, AI, and cybercrime is also frequently linked to the operation of organized crime groups, which are formed of different individuals that possess different skills that they are able to utilize to commit those crimes. It is difficult to estimate how many cybercrimes occur across the world, as there's no standardized legal definitions for those across different jurisdictions. There have been different criminological theories that have been used to make sense out of cybercrime, and these include routine activity theory, social learning theory, and some general theories of crime, and whether these are appropriate to be applied to various forms of cybercrime. Cybercrimes also highlight the need and importance of international response and cooperation, as perpetrators and victims can be located in different regions and jurisdictions. And for example, Interpol would be one organization that has a vital role in building this cross-sector partnership and enabling international law enforcement cooperation, including cooperation in battling cybercrimes. Cybercrimes also raise questions about the responsibility to prevent crimes, with debates about whether it is appropriate to place this responsibility on computer users rather than states and the criminal justice system. And the last development I want to mention is gender and crime. So the research into the impact of gender on crime is not new in itself, but in recent years, it has been expanded to include considerations of transgender and gender diverse identities, particularly in the context of imprisonment. These discussions have included the questioning of gender binary, nature of prisons, with questions of how the unique needs of transgender and gender diverse people can be accounted for within the prison system. For example, Scottish prison system has introduced a new policy in early 2024 for the management of transgender people in custody. And this policy, which the SPS called individualized, outlines the new guidelines for the treatment of transgender individuals in custody, including decision-making processes regarding the housing of transgender individuals in Scottish prisons. The policy presumes that transgender people admitted into custody will be considered on an individual basis as far as possible, unless there are risks related to placing them in accommodation which accords with their affirmed gender. And some of these risks are linked to transgender women meeting the violence against women and girls criteria, in which case they could be admitted into the accommodation in a male estate. So this policy is not perfect. However, it is a step towards understanding the accommodating of gender identities and transgender and gender identities that transgress the gender binary. However, it still highlights this way of thinking of transgender people as a potential threat to the gender binary, and the policy itself does not account for non-binary people and how they would be treated within the criminal justice system and the prison system.
Here is a list of additional resources that we think may be useful to you, so please do take a look at the embedded hyperlinks here on this page. And finally, we'd like to thank you so much for listening to our webinar today. We hope you enjoyed it, and please do have a look at the learning resources that you can find on the SCCJR website. Thank you so much.